My name is Darryl Anka. I am the channel for an entity known as Bashar. I am also a writer, producer, director. As a young boy, I've always been artistically inclined. I could start drawing as soon as I could pick up a pencil when I was 2 years old. But I had an incident happen that happened at 3 years old that I didn't remember until much later in my life. And I was playing in the living room of my parents' home. And I was, one of those things where kids make a fort with a card table and a blanket. I was underneath it, I was drawing. And what appeared to me in midair was this whirlpool of light just hanging there. Now, as a child, I didn't think anything of it because I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. But my perception is that there was somebody communicating to me through that, as if it was a window to somewhere else. For me, that became what I would consider to be the inciting incident that indicated that there was some kind of an agreement here that was going to unfold at some point in my life that had to do with the channeling. But it didn't really get triggered until 1973. In 1973, I was in my early 20s when on 2 occasions in broad daylight, a week apart, I had 2 very close UFO sightings with friends with me both times. The first time was only about 125 feet away. The second time was only about 60 or 70 feet away. Some kind of an advanced technological ship. No sound, being able to move in unusual ways. You don't think much of it until you actually see something yourself. And then your whole world turns upside down because those things weren't supposed to really exist. But seeing something like that solidly made me realize that things were much different than we were being told. So I wanted to find out more about it. I started doing the research, finding any book I could on UFO sightings. And at that time in 1973, the metaphysical section in bookstores wasn't very big. You could probably find everything on one shelf. There was UFO stuff, there was psychic stuff, there was channeling stuff. Mostly the Seth material at that time was becoming pretty popular. So I read all of that and I started just kind of digesting all of this stuff and realizing that there was sort of a whole other world going on here. 10 years after the sighting, I was introduced to a channel who was conducting seminars at the time. I went into the class not because I thought I wanted to be a channel in any way, shape, or form, but I was curious as to how channeling could be taught, because I just sort of assumed it was something that just sort of happened to you out of the blue. But I wanted to further my research, so I went into the class, and it was a series of different guided meditations, and it wasn't like you were necessarily expected to have to channel with an entity, but it was about getting in touch with your creative side, your own higher mind, however you wanted to use the meditations. But about halfway through the course, we were in a particular guided meditation being given by the entity through the channel. Something happened that I can only describe as a kind of an instant telepathic contact from Bashar. It was like somebody just sort of shoved this information in my head in a split second. I instantly remembered making an agreement before this life to do this with him. I understood the UFO had been shown to me by him to get me to start doing the research that I needed to do. So when it came time to fulfill the agreement, I would have enough information to not be afraid of it, to be somewhat understanding of what was happening. And the message basically was, now you know it's time to begin. Is this something you still want to do? It was a choice. Now, all of this happened in a split second. It's like somebody just took a DVD and just shoved it in your head, and suddenly you've got the whole story. And I thought, okay, am I hallucinating? Is this a side effect of the meditation? I didn't know what was going on. But the second this was happening, because I hadn't said anything out loud, the entity stopped talking to the class and turned right to me and said, there is an entity here for you right now if you're ready to begin. And in that same moment, I happened to glance behind me at one of the other classmates had somehow picked up on the image of Bashar I saw in my head, and she was sketching it on a piece of paper, his face. So I said, okay, this is not just my imagination. There's something going on here. I guess I'll just keep exploring and see what happens. So by the end of the next class, a woman named Margot Chandley, who was doing the first thesis paper for her doctorate on the connection between psychology and channeling, asked me to be one of the subjects that she could study to write her paper. And so I would go to her house, she would invite friends, I would sit there and channel, she would take her notes and write her paper. Well, the first week, it was like 5 friends. But the next week there was 10 friends, and then it would be 20 friends and 30 friends. And then we had to start renting auditoriums to get all the people in. And as soon as people in other cities and other countries started hearing the tapes, they started inviting me to travel to their city or their country. And here I am 36 years later, still doing this. So in a nutshell, that was kind of my journey as to how I wound up where I am right now, channeling this entity that we call Bashar.
But it'll say good day to you this day of your time. How are you all?
I'm his past self, he's a future self, as we look at linear time. Bashar is not the entity's name. In their reality, they're telepathic with each other, they don't need names, but he knew we needed to call him something. I am half Irish and half Syrian. My father's side is Middle Eastern. It is a Middle Eastern word. I didn't speak the language, I still don't speak the language. And I actually had to be told 2 or 3 years after I started channeling, when somebody did speak the language, they came up to me and said, "Do you understand what Bashar means?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." He said, "It actually is a Syrian word. It means messenger or bringer of good news." So I said, okay, I get it. He had to choose something out of my background somewhere that is at least representative of what he's doing and allows us to give him a name, even though it's not literally his name. And this is part of kind of these breadcrumbs that he sort of drops for me throughout my life that are a puzzle that is just personally for me to pull together. But at least it allows us to identify with him in some way, shape, or form and allow him to have a normal back and forth.
This, for us, is how contact begins. By the dissemination of ideas, reflections, and information that give you the opportunity to absorb them at your own pace, in your own timing, at your own discretion, for we force no ideas upon you.
The feeling of connecting with Bashar telepathically is kind of like, I can describe it like it's a vibrational resonance that is a particular frequency that I recognize as not my own, or at least a much bigger part of me. And I sort of liken it to the idea of 2 tuning forks. When you start one vibrating, if they're keyed to each other, then the other one starts vibrating in harmony. And as soon as they start matching frequency and vibrating together, that's kind of what it's like. So the channeling class, as I understood it, ultimately was training you to shift your brainwave frequency to a point where you go into a state called gamma, which is about 40 to 45 or 40 to 100 cycles per second, but I stay in the range of about 40 to 45 when I'm channeling. And then Bashar makes an adjustment in his brainwave frequency, and somewhere in the middle we lock. And as we vibrate together, what you get is a translation of his thoughts into the language that I'm programmed with. So the idea of channeling is not possession or anything like that. It is a synchronization of frequencies that allow you to have the same thoughts at the same time as whoever you are vibrating on the same wavelength with.
First and foremost, you are always manifesting something. If you were not, you wouldn't have an experiential physical reality, correct? Correct. So the idea is, you do not have to learn how to manifest. This is automatic.
It's Bashar's perspective that if we understand the nature of reality, the nature of existence, we'll understand our nature better, our relationship to existence, why we're here, why we experience reality the way we do. He is letting us know that there is a way to take all of the different things that people have been talking about on Earth for thousands of years that might be considered philosophies, or more recently, New Age concepts, and no pun intended, bring them down to earth. In the sense that we are often left with New Age concepts that sound wonderful, but what do they mean?
What you are simply learning is how to manifest more consciously, to be more aware of how you manifest so that you can manifest what you prefer, instead of manifesting your unconscious beliefs.
For example, one of the concepts you hear constantly in, New Age thought or whatever you want to call it, is follow your bliss, act on your passion, live your dreams. Now that is a wonderful sentiment and it sounds great, but where's the practical side of understanding that concept? How do you do that? How do you go about really living your bliss and knowing that you'll be okay, knowing you'll be supported? He takes that concept, follow your passion, and he starts breaking it down. Well, what is that? What is that state of being? What is that feeling? You can think about things all day long. You can talk about them all day long. But if you're not willing to actually act on something that is supposed to be representative of who you are, what your truth really is, who the person is that you truly were created to be, if you don't act on that, you're not speaking the language of physical reality.
Everything is fundamentally neutral. Life is meaningless. You're the one that's designed to give life meaning. If you give situations a positive meaning, you will get a beneficial positive effect. If you give them a negative definition, you can only get an effect that is representative of negativity, such as struggle, strife, difficulty, and obstacle. What you put out is what you get back.
He's saying physical reality is basically like a mirror. We're creating our reality. It's a projection of our consciousness. Even a lot of our physicists are beginning to say this now that they understand there's not really a physical world out there. It's in here. And it's a translation of energy. It's a translation of our consciousness. And so when you think of physical reality like a mirror, like a glass mirror, you start to realize that what you're experiencing is a reflection. And it gives you an opportunity to use the mirror as a guiding mechanism to say, well, do I prefer what I'm getting back here? Or is there something I would like to change about this? And Bashar takes it down fundamentally to the idea of belief. What you believe to be true, what you've been taught to define and believe as true for you, is what you experience your reality to be, because it can only give you back what you're giving out. To him, that is a law of the universe. He gives you that as a literal tool so that when you finally reveal them to yourself consciously, you can actually see that you've probably picked them up from your parents, your friends, your society, your school. They probably have nothing to do with you. And now that you see that it really has nothing to do with you, the belief kind of becomes nonsensical. It takes on this illogical tone. And as soon as it does, it vanishes. And the behavior changes, the emotions change, the thoughts change, the experience changes.
We call this the rubber band analogy. Fret not, despair not that you have experienced that degree of darkness, that degree of limitation, that degree of negativity. Because the farther back into darkness you pull the rubber band, when you finally let go, it's going to fly that much faster and that much farther into the light.
The thing that I love about Bashar is because he says that he actually is a physical being, he understands physical reality. He experiences physical reality. He understands how you have to take those concepts and ground them into physical reality, into a form of physics, a toolkit that we can actually physically apply and get an effect. And by him explaining what the tools are in that kit, we have tools we can apply to physical reality and actually get an effect.